All right. Thank you for showing up. This is going to be a fun call. This is an Eagles Club call, and this is generally a call for just paid members of our Eagles Club. But this is a new message for me. I think it's a really important message that everybody needs to hear. So welcome, everyone. I'm Sean Smith, and the topic of this call tonight is healing the masculine wound. And as I said, it's somewhat of a new message for me. And I think the message itself is evolving. You know, the notes that I've been taking, I probably could have taken notes for another 5 hours and it just would have kept coming and coming and coming. So this is an exploration. And I think it is a message that we all need. I think it's a message that the world needs. I think what we're going to talk about tonight is really the cause of pretty much all of our challenges as a society, really. I think it explains so much of our ills. It explains our conflict as people with other people. It also explains a lot of our conflict with ourselves personally. And to me, it's just become very clear that this is the issue. And, you know, this isn't necessarily my message. It's a message that I've learned over the course of the last 12 years. I've been coaching in this industry of personal development for about 12 years now. And I was coaching women primarily for much of that time. And what I noticed was that a woman's self-esteem was directly, or is directly, tied to their relationship with their father. And over the course of 5, 6, 7 years, I realized that was such a clean, direct connection and correlation. And so I just kept telling myself, you know, somebody needs to tell dads what I've been learning, right? With all this coaching of females. And so finally I realized that I was that somebody, and I wrote a book called Daddy, Are You Proud of Me?, which should come out in the next couple months. And it caused me to really start exploring what's causing the problem, right? Not just the daddy-daughter relationship, but what is it that we as men are not getting or are getting that continues to perpetuate the problem. And so I've been really studying a lot more and talking to a lot of people about energies, about masculine energy and feminine energy. And so this conversation is really about energy. It's not necessarily about gender. It's not about men. It's about masculinity. And it's not about women. It's about femininity. And these problems that we face in society and that we face individually with ourselves and our sabotage as we try to go after success and all the things that we want in our life, you know, these are fabric problems, right? It's in the fabric of our being. You know, the problem is in the programming, right? It's like it's in the follicles. It's not in the hair. It's deeper than the surface. It's in the roots under the ground. And the problem is that we keep trying to solve the issues above the ground, and that'll never work, right? And I firmly believe that the ultimate solution to pretty much all of our society's challenges is to heal this masculine wound. You know, and we've got all kinds of stuff that's in the news constantly, that's in the media, whether it's the MeToo movement or racism or police brutality and shootings or the mass shootings in schools and other places. And it all comes down to this singular issue in my opinion. And so, as I said, this is an energy thing, right? We all have masculine and feminine energy because that's just what exists in the world. These are the two polar opposite energies in the world. It's in all of humanity. It's often misunderstood as a male-female problem because it's just how we're programmed, right? We as men are programmed to be more masculine, and women are programmed to be more feminine. But the issue is not in the gender. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of our challenges and conflicts are not being solved, because we don't even have a target in the right place. We think it's a man-woman issue, and it's really not. And so the problems continue to go unidentified and unsolved. And then we just keep trying to chase them at the surface, right? And so one of the things that's important is that we recognize that these energies just are. This is not and we both have them. This is not an either or scenario. It's not that you are masculine or you are feminine. You have both. We all have both. And we need to understand, because this is not what we're taught, we need to understand that this is a union between two opposing energies that complement each other. It's not a competition that, masculine versus feminine. It's a union. It's necessary for the two pieces to go together. Masculine, feminine. I want you to think about, these two energies. It's like two different paths to walk down. There's a masculine path and there's a feminine path. We as men are told that we should walk the masculine path. Women are generally told that they should walk the feminine path. And once we're in that energy of the path, that's where the masculine works the way it works and the feminine works the way it works. And we have cross paths, meaning, there are men that are on the feminine path and women that are on the masculine path, and sometimes we'll switch in different times of our lives. So again, it's not contained in who we are in our body parts. It's not contained in our DNA or our biology as a human necessarily. It's not in our wiring as much as it's in our programming. So a lot of it is, there are a lot of issues, or not issues, but differences obviously biologically between men and women. But this one, in order to understand it, in order to heal it, this one we have to understand is an energetic thing. So I want to start by giving you what my distinctions are for this conversation between masculine and feminine. And I don't want you to get caught up in what your distinctions are or what you heard from maybe some other source, right? And I certainly am not the source on masculine and feminine energies, but I'm going to use this understanding of what I'm about to explain for the rest of this call. And if some of the words are a little bit different than what you've heard before, the way you understand it, that's fine. I don't want you to get caught up in the semantics or the connotations of certain labels. I want you to understand the essence, especially the essence of the wound. So masculine and feminine energy are really oppositional in nature. There's this dichotomy, right? Masculine energy is really about winning and losing. It's about competing. And the force or the power of masculine energy is rooted in control. Feminine energy doesn't even really understand losing. There's no such thing as losing. So there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to protect against. When you're fully in your feminine energy, there is no need for protection. And the feminine power is rooted in creation, not control. Men, when they're in their feminine or when they're in their masculine energy, gain their power by control. And that's just not the way feminine works. And, neither side really understands the other, right? We as human beings can step in both buckets, but the feminine doesn't necessarily understand the masculine and vice versa, because they are completely different energies. They can come together and play together, but they really are completely different in many regards, right? And the feminine energy is more about, well, let me try to stay in the same rhythm that I'm going in. So the masculine energy is more about logic and linear reasoning and scientific. It's based on rules and being rigid. And if you step out of line, there's punishment, right? Feminine energy is really non-linear. It's more emotional, more artistic, more in a state of flow, more exploratory by nature, more harmonious, definitely more compassion. Masculine energy is also more external in its direction, right? Masculine energy is about chasing and going outward and pushing and striving, whereas the feminine energy is more focused inward. It's about receiving and allowing and sort of surrendering to things coming toward it, whereas the masculine wants to chase it down. And as far as problem solving, the masculine is really about find it and fix it, right? See the nail, hammer the nail, find it and fix it. And the feminine energy really doesn't even see anything to fix, because it's more about embracing and nurturing, and again, there's no sense of deficit or loss or any of that. So the masculine energy really is more aligned with the way our head works. It's more aligned with tangible definitions of success and judgments. It's more aligned with doing. We as men tend to be programmed that we are valuable when we are providing and protecting in our masculine roles. That's where we get our value. Whereas women tend to get their value, again, according to society, when they are nurturing and taking care of other people. So these are completely opposite standards for value. And so if I, as a man, am not protecting and providing, then I don't feel like I'm in my masculine energy. And since I'm supposed to be as a man, then I feel worthless, which is one of the most painful feelings that a human can have. And then for women, if you're not taking care of other people, if you're not making sure that everybody has what they need, then you feel almost worthless, right? Like you're not doing your job. So the masculine energy is really afraid of the other side. The masculine energy fears femininity because of what femininity stands for, what it's all about, right? The masculine energy fears emotions. It fears pain specifically. It fears fear. And it's all because the masculine believes that emotions and fears and pains and all of that are weak and vulnerable. And vulnerable in the sense that we're going to be taken advantage of, right? Vulnerable to attack. If you think of the role of protecting, if I'm vulnerable in my role as a protector, that means somebody might attack me. Somebody might attack who I'm trying to protect. And so the masculine is always trying to avoid a state of vulnerability because of the fear of it getting its power taken away. And the feminine doesn't have any of those inherent fears. Really, what the feminine fears is being hurt by the masculine energy, right? But that's not an inherent fear. It's a learned fear. At one point in time, again, generally women are hurt by this masculine energy, and that's the first time that they realize that's something to be afraid of. So it's more of a learned fear, whereas the masculine has an innate fear of being out of control and weak and all the things that the feminine energy represents to it. And because the masculine is really focused on protection and life and death, I mean, it really truly operates in survival mode, and it will defend itself compulsively with force. And it doesn't care. The masculine energy doesn't have compassion. It only really cares about protecting self, protecting its own identities, protecting its beliefs, protecting whatever it is committed to protecting. And nobody is going to infringe on that. So it's very quick to strike out, right? And again, this is the real key piece. Its power is rooted in control. So one of the things that the masculine doesn't even understand is that emotions are really human. Emotions are not vulnerable, in terms of being attacked. Emotions are not a sign of weakness. Emotions are human. But to the masculine energy, that's very dangerous, right? So each side is afraid of the other, but the fear is different, right? And to the feminine energy, masculinity represents restriction. It represents kind of suffocation, right? It represents this feeling that it doesn't even understand, this competitive spirit, controlling me, that doesn't even make sense to the feminine energy. And so when the feminine energy feels that restriction, its impulses try to free itself, because that's really what the feminine energy is. It's freedom, it's expansion, it's openness. When the masculine energy feels like it's out of control, its impulse is to regain control. So the way that these two energies deal with conflict is in direct opposition, that can't play together, right? So when the feminine is trying to expand out of the grasp of the masculine energy, the masculine feels threatened, and it's just going to try to squeeze tighter. And it literally goes into survival mode. I got to gain this control back. And a part of this is because if the feminine, or I'm just going to use the woman in this case, if the woman, and we see this a lot in relationships, if the woman becomes independent, then the man no longer is necessary for providing and necessary for protecting. So an empowered woman is very threatening to a wounded man. To an insecure man, an empowered woman is very threatening, because the empowered woman is going to walk out the door, which number one is abandonment, but even deeper than that, I think in this conversation of masculinity, she's going to walk out the door and take her need for him with her. I don't need you anymore if I'm empowered. I don't need to be protected anymore. I don't need to be provided for anymore. And I, as the wounded man, you just took my two motivations for existence away. If you take my two motivations for existence away, why am I here? What's my reason for being anymore if my two main reasons for being just walked out the door disguised as your empowerment? So that's why masculinity, wounded masculinity, is afraid of empowerment, especially in a feminine sense. Now, pure masculinity doesn't have that fear, but pure masculinity is actually really hard to find in our society because of the programming. I'll get into some of that. But the feminine energy doesn't feel threatened by the masculine energy in the sense of leaving, or because the feminine energy says, yeah, go hunt for dinner and bring it back to us, right? So the feminine energy is totally okay with the masculine walking away from it and trusting that it will return, and trusting that it will bring whatever they need in the way of food or resources or what have you. So a lot of this energetic programming is really rooted in our evolution as humans over thousands and thousands of years, right? Evolution in terms of the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with the planet, our existence, evolution. So femininity doesn't have any reason to be afraid of masculinity until, as I said earlier, it gets hurt by it. And then it learns this is dangerous. It's like the little kid who doesn't understand that the stove burner is hot until they touch the burner and go, oh, that's hot. It doesn't understand that a dog can bite until they get bitten for their first time. And then they realize, oh my goodness, that animal is scary. And then for the rest of their lives, potentially, they're afraid of dogs of all kinds. It might even get over exaggerated to where they become afraid of animals of all kinds, or anything with a mouth, right? Because it learned that this is dangerous because it just got hurt. So that's the way that feminine and masculine energies exist and relate or don't relate to each other. And again, it's important for us to understand that, you know, we're not talking about apples and oranges. We're talking about like lions and Legos. You know, we're talking about two things that are entirely and completely different in almost all ways. That's why there's such a challenge in understanding and communicating. So then I want to be really clear here. I'm not placing blame on either of these energies either, right? So I'm not blaming feminine. I'm not blaming masculine. I'm not defending masculine. I'm just trying to make distinctions, right? But now one of the things that is unique to the masculine wound is that it's hurting itself. The feminine energy doesn't hurt masculinity because the feminine energy doesn't have the tools to hurt. It just doesn't. It's not in its energy. So hurting only comes from a masculine source. So it's the masculine energy that keeps hurting itself in the form of, if I as a human body am hurting myself, or if my fellow masculine man am hurting me, it's the masculine energy that keeps feeding off of itself and perpetuating the wound, right? And perpetuating all the problems. And so what we need to do as men is we need to be more nurturing with each other. We need to not teach our little boys that crying is a sign of weakness. We need to embrace our emotions. And with our children, whether it's our biological children or the children that are just looking up to us as elders or leaders, just the children that are looking at their influential inputs, we need to show emotions. We need to show that it's okay to be human. We need to show that it's okay to be real, right? We have to stop perpetuating all these caveman principles that, crying is a sign of weakness and emotions are a sign of weakness. Once upon a time, that might have been true, right? If you let your guard down, you could be attacked and killed by an animal or by somebody else. That's not the case anymore. Although it's like it's in our DNA almost, right? It's in our body. So this wound is being transferred in the form of energy, in the form of beliefs, in the form of verbal teachings, in the form of observation. It's just being transferred. And a lot of the lessons and the learnings that we are getting, especially as men right now, is what I'm talking about, are just simply not relevant anymore. So one of the worst things we can do is tell a little boy to not be a girl, tell a little boy to be a man. And when we say be a man, what we're saying is don't cry. Don't cry like a little girl. Man up, right? Don't be a wuss. Don't be a pussy. And that word in this context is like maybe the worst thing we can be called as men. And I apologize if that word is offensive, but it's reality, right? One of the worst things a man can be called when he is in this wounded masculinity is that word. It's like emotional and identity castration. That's what it's like. And so men will fight to never be considered a pussy from a weakness standpoint. And that's what's taught to our little boys as well as what they are observing. And it's everywhere. It's in the media. It's in our movies. It's in our literature. I mean, it's everywhere. And so when we as men and boys are so threatened by anything that looks like power that's going to take something away from me, then I become deathly afraid of being victimized. And I specifically use the word death because it feels like survival, right? If I am overpowered, if I'm overpowered as a protector, not only am I worthless, but I will die. And everybody and everything that I'm protecting is now in danger and will probably die as well. At the very least, be taken from me. That's like the biggest offense to masculine energy. And so the wounded masculine spends its whole existence trying to avoid being victimized, its whole existence. And it becomes completely irrational. Just like the little kid who got bit by a dog is afraid of all animals, it becomes completely irrational. And anything that looks like, smells like, might even in any kind of way look like power, might threaten my manness, might threaten my masculinity, then I'm going to squash it as quickly as I can. When I see a little red flag, I'm going to squash it because the fear of being taken advantage of is so deep to me. And then what it turns into from a behavior standpoint is control. And control turns into abuse a lot of times. And the feminine energy does not understand why it's being abused. It doesn't understand why it did anything wrong. Why am I being hurt? Especially when I'm just trying to do what I am here to do. I'm trying to love. I'm trying to be. This is all about what I think you want. But then I get abused for it. And the abuse is generally, it's just a transfer of victimhood. That's what it is. I'm so afraid as a masculine wounded man to be victimized that I will victimize first. Because if I hurt you first bad enough, you can't hurt me. But I don't realize in that moment that you don't have an agenda to hurt me. It doesn't understand. It doesn't make sense to me because I'm out to hurt you, right? We're in the ring and everybody is out to harm each other. So I think you're going to hurt me because that's the way I'm operating. That's my agenda. So I live my life with gloves on. As a masculine man, I live my life that way. And I would rather kill than be killed. And if we drop that intensity down and it's not truly life or death, I would rather control than be controlled. And see, when my agenda is to control somebody else, it's not for the sake of control. It's for the sake of replenishing something that I think I don't have, right? That victimhood is scary to me because it means I'm weak. It means my manhood is being taken away from me. It means my power, my reason for being is being taken away from me. So when I think it has been taken away from me, then I feel this void. That void is inherently and deathly scary to me. My reason for being is at stake. So I, with no compassion, am going to try to replenish what I'm lacking from some source that has it. And that's pretty much why all abuse happens. It's a transfer of victimhood. It's a replenishing of what is perceived to be lacking. But the victim pretty much all the time has to be perceived to be weaker because wounded masculinity doesn't want to struggle. The last thing I want is to fight somebody powerful because that might just confirm that I have no power. So I don't want to fight somebody powerful. I want to fight somebody who's weak or somebody who won't fight back. So I'm going to look for somebody who can't or won't fight back so that I'm almost guaranteed to replenish the source. And that's how masculinity tends to choose its victims. Yeah, vampire. So I wrote a play recently. A few of you were there. I wrote and performed a one-man show recently. And it was all about my relationship with my mom. And it could have been called Healing the Masculine Wound. That could have been the whole play. That could have been the title of the play because that's really what the essence of the play was, is healing the masculine wound. And it was me understanding that in my abusing of my mom, I was just seeking control and hurting her so she didn't continue to hurt me, although she never was hurting me. I made it all up in my head. And you use the word vampire. For me, it was like a werewolf. Very similar. And so I, as the werewolf, was willing to hurt my own mother because my wound was so deep. Now, it was a wound that I gave myself, but I don't want to take responsibility of that. So I'm going to pretend that she's to blame. And if she's to blame, then I have no compassion. If she's to blame, then I will absolutely go after her because this is life or death. It's survival. And that kind of anger is blind. It operates without reason. It operates without humanity. But it's not natural. That's the thing. Abusing another human being is not natural. It's learned. A human being is not wired to harm another human being unless there's a reason to. So if the masculine feels this void and it needs to replenish, well, then there's a reason. If the masculine feels out of control and it needs the feeling of control, there's the reason. So I'm not abusing to abuse because I like the pain in the other person. It's totally selfish. It's a completely selfish act. I need to feel that. Now, what's going to happen is as soon as the abuse event is over, the void will still be there. That's like the way, we try to fill all of our voids as human beings. Once we sober up, the void comes back. Once we stop doing whatever the activity is to numb our emotions come back, or the feeling of lack always comes back, so that it just becomes a perpetual cycle. And that's why wounded masculinity tends to abuse and abuse and abuse and abuse. It's just trying to replenish something that cannot be replenished, especially externally, by some kind of external force. But it's all trying to retain control. It's all in a state of fear from being taken advantage of. And the more out of control that a human body is, the masculine embodiment, the more out of control that a human is, the more in control they have to be of others. The more out of control I am internally, the more in control I need to be externally in order to balance those things out. But if my masculinity is not wounded and I don't need to replenish anything because there is no void, then I don't need to control you as my wife, as my partner, as my children, as my anybody. I don't need to control you because you don't serve a purpose of replenishing anything, because I'm not living in a state of lack or void. So part of the solution for men specifically is that we need to redefine what being a man is. We need to redefine what being in control is. And that definition for men has to be in opposition of the way that masculinity tends to work, which is more internal. I need to define my power as being in control internally. I need to realize that I don't have to harm other people in order to gain power, because that's not really what power is. And it's actually in direct opposition of one of my roles, which is to protect. So we are out of integrity with our own role when we're hurting other people in the name of protection. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And that's one of the reasons why the problem doesn't get solved, is because the problem is feeding off of itself. And then we're using the perspective of the problem to try to solve the problem. In other words, we're using punishment to try to squash out of control masculinity. That is out of control masculinity. It can't be solved by itself when it's out of control. So much of this has to be a disruption and a destruction of the way we have primarily operated in these different energies. And I'm not really paying all that much attention to the comments just because I'm not. And but it looked like somebody just mentioned oh, now I forget what the comment was. But it goes back. I just really want to tie this together. Wounded masculinity hurts externally. Oh, yeah, somebody mentioned like anorexia. Wounded femininity tends to hurt internally. The feminine energy, when it's wounded, turns inward and says, what's wrong with me? Masculinity, when it's wounded, looks outward and says, what's wrong with you? Because it can't be me. I'm not willing to take responsibility for being out of control, for being insecure, for being inept, for being impotent. As I was reading an article today, it used the word impotent, and that word tends to have like a sexual connotation. But that's only one application of it. The word impotent, it really just means powerless. Now, you can be powerless in the sexual context, or you can just be powerless in general. But I'll tell you, when I saw that word impotent as a man, it shook my soul. The energy of that word is the exact essence of what we're afraid of. We're afraid of not being able. We're afraid of losing our vitality. We're afraid of losing our strength. We're afraid of losing our dignity. We're afraid of losing. But again, this is energetic. This isn't necessarily man or woman. So some women do hurt externally, and a woman that hurts externally is operating from her masculine wound. A man who hurts internally is operating from his feminine wound. So it's feminine versus masculine, not men versus women. I want to be very clear, and obviously I'm going to continue to go back to that. Now, specifically with women, one of the things you have to be really aware of is how you treat yourself in opposition to who you are. So because wounded femininity tends to turn inward and say, what's wrong with me? Most women beat themselves up. Most women are their own worst abusers. Now, my question for you is this: is abuse feminine or masculine? It's 100% masculine. So most women who are shrinking and cowering under the pain of masculinity are using masculinity to address that. That'll never work. And it's not who you are. You're not good. The feminine energy is not good at being masculine. You don't know how to do it because it's not who you are. The masculine energy is not good at being feminine either. So for all of you women specifically, when conflict arises, use your most powerful tool, which is your feminine creative power, which is rooted in nurturing and taking care. Don't use punishment to solve punishment. That's the problem. So this masculine wound is really twofold. The masculine has a wound internally, and then it wounds others because of that. So most women have a masculine wound from a man. Most men have a masculine wound from a man. And that masculine wound is either from, I mean, it could be from presence or absence. It could be from a father or fatherly figure abusing us on some level, controlling us, telling us to not be a little girl, and all that program that I talked about. Or it could be the absence of that energy. And we know that a father's absence can be very traumatic to a child. But a father can be absent physically, or a father can be absent emotionally. My experience is physical presence and emotional absence is actually more harmful than physical absence. So a little child can understand and deal with the idea that daddy is literally physically not home better than dealing with the fact that daddy is physically home but emotionally is not present. So the wound doesn't look the same all the time, but masculinity has been hurt by masculinity, and then in response to that, it hurts others, right? So women have been hurt by this masculine wound, and it has usually come through a male channel. And see, when women are operating in their masculine power, they don't have the same physical force that a man has. So if a woman is hurting externally out of her masculine energy, and a man right next to her is hurting externally out of his masculine energy, the man's striking out is going to be much more forceful. So women have generally, like some women have been hurt by their moms, let's say, from the masculine wound through their moms, but they've probably also been hurt from a man through the masculine wound. And the man's embodiment of wounded masculinity is even more forceful and scarier and more dangerous physically than the woman's embodiment of wounded masculinity. So it's my assessment, based on my experience in this industry and coaching so many women, that almost all women have been wounded very deeply by men. Now, they've really been wounded by the masculine energy, but it came through the embodiment of a man also. And so here's the kicker. Here's what's so important to understand. If you as a woman have your deepest wound having been inflicted upon you through a male channel, your deepest healing can only come through a male channel. The healing has to match, the source of healing has to match the source of pain in order for complete clearing to happen. That's my assessment. That's my assertion based on my experience. And I'm not saying that women can't be healed to some extent through feminine channels. They can. But if the source of the deepest wound is through a masculine channel, the source of ultimate healing also needs to be through a masculine channel. And this is not in any way a blaming of women, because this is more of a calling forward of men. We as men need to provide that masculine safety, because most of our women have only experienced masculine danger. Most women have not experienced pure masculinity in its safe, healthy form after a certain point of their life, right? When they get bit by the dog, now all dogs are potentially scary. They might see other dogs that don't bite them, but the fear doesn't go away. They're still afraid of the next dog. So once a woman has been hurt by wounded masculinity, there is an embodiment of danger through that masculine channel. And so this is a a calling forward of men. We need to provide the safety that our women and children and our fellow men need. Because again, this isn't male, female. This isn't necessarily even adult, child. This is energy. The masculine energy needs to heal itself through vulnerability. It needs to surrender the structure that it's operating on. It needs to surrender this fear of being victimized. It needs to surrender this definition of being a man equals control and force. We need to disrupt that whole thing and allow pure masculinity to step forward. And here's the cool thing. There's no effort that needs to be taken in the healing, because the healing is in the masculine energy itself. We don't need to do anything. We just need to be inside of it. It's like the healing powers are already encoded in the fabric of vulnerable, healthy masculinity. We don't have to do anything. That doesn't make sense to the masculine model, remember. It's all about doing, find the nail, hammer the nail. It doesn't make sense that you could just be and allow whatever the healing that needs to be done by itself on its own with no effort. I'm the one that's supposed to protect and provide and solve problems. That doesn't make sense. You just want me to sit here and just be? Yeah, because that's where our true strength comes from as men. It comes from our beingness, not our doingness. And the source of all of it is love. Inside of vulnerable masculinity as well as femininity, it's love. This is all a love or not love conversation. In every single moment, we're either seeking love or we're giving love, right? And in every single moment, we are perceiving to be loved or we are perceiving to not be loved. When I, in the masculine, am perceiving to not be loved, then I need to replenish. I need to do all the things that I've already been talking about. When I, in the masculine, perceive that I am loved and I am love, then there's no reason to hurt. There's no reason to protect. There's no reason to perpetuate all of that cycle. That's the true healing of the wound. For me, in my relationship with my mom, there was a conversation that we had about 10 years ago, and I saw her in a different light. And as soon as I saw her in a different light, compassion replaced the anger. As soon as compassion replaced the anger, I realized that I have been loved this whole time. The story was mine that I created. My mom never abandoned me. She was always there ready to hug me and give me all the love that only a mother can give. I just wasn't open to it. But as soon as I became open to it, my void was filled. In that moment, I mean, literally, it was a matter of minutes. In that moment, my masculine wound was healed, and I no longer had the desire to hurt her or anybody else. So that's ultimately the solution is love. It's love of self. But we have to be vulnerable. See, the love is already available. It's plentiful. It's abundant. It's inside vulnerability. So we, in the masculine energy, we just have to cut away all the things that we've created that are there to protect, when we understand that there's no reason to protect. And then it just unfolds and uncovers what's already there. We're not searching for something that needs to be created. We just need to unearth something that's already there, uncover something that's already there. And we're the ones that provided the covers. Now, that makes it somewhat challenging. That's the topic of a different conversation. It makes it challenging. But when we can surrender in that way and open up and uncover what we've been covering up, then the healing happens. It just happens on its own. But it's scary to the man to do that. It's like this simultaneous desire and fear. Right. Mondre just said frightening. It is scary as heck. for the man to get vulnerable and challenge everything that we've been talking about, opening up to being taken advantage of, to attack, to being stripped of my identity and my reason for being. So it's very scary. And it provides this situation that both of us have where we are simultaneously afraid and desiring the same thing. Women who've been hurt by masculinity also at a deeper level are attracted to masculinity because these are puzzle pieces that go together. And the feminine energy doesn't understand why there's even conflict. So the feminine energy is seeking the very thing that it's afraid of because it was hurt before. And that's this perpetual conflict that most of us are in, where we're afraid of and seeking this same thing. Most of us are seeking success and afraid of success at the same time. Most of us are seeking connection in an intimate relationship and deeply afraid of connection in an intimate relationship at the same time, because once upon a time we were connected and then we got hurt. The exact same scenario of getting bitten by the dog. You're always going to have that fear of any dog, anything that looks like a dog, because you want to protect until that gets cleared. And it has to be cleared neurologically. It has to be cleared in our bodies. We're walking around with all of these wounds in our bodies. That's why they can't be cleared in our minds. Yet most of the solutions in society are logical. They're intellectual. You can't solve an emotional problem with intellect. Now, the good news is we can do that work. It's one of the things that I've been studying and committed to for the longest time. And if any of you are relating to a lot of this, resonating, and you're seeing wounds that you have, that work can be done. And if you want any support, reach out to us. We'll do a free phone call with you and help you identify where the wounds are and where the healing can come from, because most of us don't have the right targets in our awareness. Our solutions are in our blind spot. So we are not going to solve the problem. CJ says, what could your mom have done or could other moms do to allow their sons to see them in a new light? I don't think she could have done anything. This was my wound to heal. Now, having said that, though, I don't want to make it sound like women are powerless. Moms in this situation are powerless. If you understand that I'm hurting you because I'm hurting myself, and you understand I am perceiving to be out of control and I'm perceiving to be in lack of love, then you can address some of those things. You can speak to my heart instead of speaking to my anger. You can speak to my fear instead of speaking to my rage, and fighting the masculine energy with more masculine energy. And you, as the mom, are not going to heal my masculine wound because that's not where the wound came from. So that's why I was saying earlier, you can absolutely do a lot to help. You can do a lot to avoid more of the conflict, but the ultimate healing has to come through the channel that the pain came from. So I see that it's an hour. I have plenty more to talk about. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2. But let me speak to, I mentioned the MeToo movement a while ago, or at the beginning of the call. And Tony Robbins is in the news right now. If any of you have seen, he made some statements about the MeToo movement a while back. And it's obviously a very big movement that has caught the attention of so many people. It's caused, a lot of men to get fired. It's caused a lot of women to step forward and shock, the world, going like, oh my gosh, she was abused as well. And so it's unearthed this conversation in society that I think is really powerful and also misunderstood on many levels. And in no way am I going to try to, solve or provide any level of completion to a subject like the Me Too movement and sexual abuse. But I do want to put a spin on that based on this whole conversation that I think a lot of people are missing. more so by men, right? But now hopefully you understand that wounded masculinity will sexually abuse a female because of the pain, all the things that I was talking about. And sexual abuse is a power move. It's not a sexual move, right? Rape and inappropriate touching and sexual abuse of pretty much all forms is about power. It's not about sex. And that's why it shows up the way it shows up, without permission and with, humor, sick humor, like it's funny. Now, we as men, the masculine energy doesn't understand why the female doesn't just suck it up. Who cares? Like, somebody just took a shot at you and no big deal, because the masculine is a warrior, right? It doesn't understand how much of a violation that is. That's why it's so ignorant. And in no way am I trying to deflect or defend. I'm just trying to create distinctions, right? Now, one thing I think that men need to understand is that feminine energy isn't used to masculine protection when the masculine is the one that did the hurting. So for instance, what are the elements of society that are here to protect us? You got the police department, you have the fire department, we have the military, right? Those are all masculine channels of the highest order. Those are based on force. They're based on weapons. They're based on violence. That is like masculine energy incarnated times 1,000. And so why would the feminine energy that has just been hurt by the masculine turn to the masculine to protect it? That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? And then sometimes the feminine energy that's just been hurt by the masculine will turn to the forces that are supposed to protect, and they don't protect. And then they learn, well, I'll never do that again, because that's worse. Now I'm being violated twice. And I'd rather be violated once than violated twice. And that's why so many women don't even come forward. That's why the MeToo movement was so powerful, because it was drawing women out of the shadows. And it's unearthing, a lot of stuff that needs to be unearthed. And how many men have been walking around the planet doing things, whether it's sexual assault or sexual abuse or verbal intimidation of women, but they've never been checked because the forces of protection are also masculine, right? And so the Me Too movement was great because it gave a voice to a lot of silent women. And a lot of them didn't come forward. At least the women said or saw that it was okay. It doesn't mean that you are useless. It doesn't mean that you have no value because you've been victimized. This is more of a problem of wounded masculinity than a problem of you. If I have something to replenish and I choose you as my victim, well, that means I see that thing that I'm looking for in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't choose you. Again, that's not to defend, to deflect in any way. It's not a misdirection. It's just an understanding of the differences in the way these two energies and the woundedness really operate. So what do we do about all of this? Let me try to wrap this up in just a few minutes and talk about what I think some of the solutions are. And I've already alluded to maybe all of these. But for the masculine wound, we have to protect or heal ourselves. The masculine energy has to heal itself through the form of nurturing, embracing a lot of the feminine attributes, the feminine qualities, instead of punishing the punishment, instead of hurting the pain. The worst thing for a man is to be judged by his fellow man. because now, number one, it's castrating on a certain level. It's highly emasculating, but it's also ostracizing. And I know as a masculine, if I'm a wounded masculine man, I certainly am not going to jump over to the feminine side because I don't even understand that stuff. And that's everything that I'm raging against. And then if my masculine side pushes me out of the bus, well, then now where do I go? So that's worse to wounded masculinity, to be ostracized from the very thing that it's trying to hold on to. So we need to restructure, redefine, re-embrace, to hold on to our own masculinity individually and collectively, with more love and appreciation and an abundance of love. I was thinking as I was writing these notes, you know, we as men, we need to walk around and tell each other that we love each other, because that's what we're missing. We have this craving for masculine love. And women can't give it to us. I mean, they can, but that doesn't exactly match the footprint that we're seeking. That doesn't exactly match. It doesn't exactly match the whole. It can fill a little bit up, but it can't fill it all up. And so we need to be more loving outwardly and publicly with each other, and especially with our boys. And then internally, I would say we need to be way more expressive with our emotions than we tend to be. You know, we're afraid of emotions. We're afraid of being out of control. But we have emotions. We all have emotions. Just because we try to avoid our pain won't make it go away, right? That's what men try to do specifically. And masculinity tries to close its eyes and shut its ears and don't talk about it and make it go away. Emotions buried alive never die. And if they're just swept under the rug, they just leave a bump. That's all. And it still operates, even though we think it's not there because we're not looking at it, we're not acknowledging it. It still operates. It's actually worse to go unacknowledged, because then we can't do anything about it. It still operates neurologically in our bodies. It still creates the stress. It still has all the triggers of the woundedness that I've been talking about, but we can't do anything about it because we haven't even acknowledged it. You can't change something that's not acknowledged. And what we as men need to understand is that emotions are just designed to flow through us. The emotional experience of a human body is actually very short. Most emotions only resonate in our bodies for a few seconds until we trap them. It's when we trap them that they don't go away. But when we are a clear channel of emotional expression, the emotions don't last very long. Now, when we've been holding them in for decades, it's scary as hell to think about crying, because we think we're never going to stop. Nobody's ever died from crying. Nobody's ever started crying and not stopped, but we're afraid of that. We're afraid of being in that vulnerable victim state and not being able to rescue ourselves, specifically as men. What we don't understand is that emotions are just energy in motion, and they don't want to be in our body any more than we want them in our body. We have to not trap them and just let them be. I also believe that emotions bring wisdom, and we can't get the wisdom, we can't learn the lessons when we don't acknowledge the teacher. If the lessons are wrapped up in the emotion and we don't look at the emotions, then we'll never look at the lessons, which just means it's going to happen again. The whole process is going to perpetuate again until we learn the lesson. For women, this might not resonate for some of you, but women need to not make men the bad guys in general. Because if you make men the bad guys, very similar to what I was just saying, the lesson is in the emotion that we're afraid of. What you're seeking is in the container that you're making bad. So you don't want to do that either, because now you are withholding from yourself what you deeply want because the container is bad, right? It's the dog scenario. All dogs are bad because I was bitten by a dog. No, not even that same kind of dog is all bad. Like Rottweilers have such a bad reputation. There are plenty of really sweet Rottweilers that would never even think about hurting anybody. They don't have it in them. But yet so many people are afraid of the Rottweiler because of our programming and what we've heard. We've heard stories, and they're so, muscular that if they do attack, they're going to do some real bad damage. People aren't afraid of Chihuahuas. And Chihuahuas, I don't know this to be true, but Chihuahuas might attack more people than Rottweilers. But when they attack, it's just like a little nip. It's like, oh, that was cute. There's nothing to really be afraid of because there's not much pain being experienced. And so what the feminine energy tends to do, and again, it's all protection, but it's protecting itself from being hurt again, whereas masculine is protecting itself from being out of control. The feminine energy tries to protect itself by universalizing the channel of pain. And there's a lot of women's empowerment movement that at its core has screw the man energy. That's not going to help either. Because that's poisonous. And so you don't want to harm yourself while you're protecting yourself. And again, it's not man or woman anyway. It's feminine, masculine energy. And even if you make the masculine wrong as a woman, now you're cutting off your own masculine energy that's also useful and necessary for you in your human container. So you can't make either of these wrong. Masculine energy is not wrong. Wounded masculinity has patterns, and that's what we want to heal, but you can't heal it while the masculine energy is wrong. Feminine energy is not wrong. The feminine energy has to be embraced by men in our own bodies. And I'm positive that's one of the reasons why I was divinely appointed to spend so much time in the Mary Kay world and spend so much time coaching women, is because I had a relationship with my mom to heal. Damn, I just felt that pretty deep. So it's about embracing the beauty in what felt like the opposition or what felt like the bad guy, so that we can co-create, so that we can be together and not fight against each other or protect from the other. That's ultimately the solution. Now, I would love to be able to just bottle this stuff up and put it in containers and send it off into the world, and everybody just drinks a little bit of this healing energy. It doesn't work that way, because we all have individual recipes. We all have individual traumas, and we're holding on to it differently based on all the variation that we have as human beings. So there is no one size fits all. Society tries to solve all of its problems with a one size fits all. Oh, we have a school shooting. Let's get rid of all the guns. Yeah, I would rather ask the question, how can we get rid of the desire to hurt people rather than get rid of the weapons of harm? So let's look at the source, but that requires an individual conversation, because how you are holding on to your trauma is different than how I'm holding on to my trauma. And if we're holding on to them differently, then we need to solve them differently. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of personal development, healing our own wounds, removing the source of the pain so that we no longer have the desire to hurt. And one of the things that happens, although I've mostly been talking about energy in men and women, but if we take this conversation into the achievement realm, all of our sabotaging patterns fit this conversation as well. Not with the exact same details in terms of hurting from a masculine place and what feminine energy is, although those components are in our sabotaging patterns as well. But when we no longer have the need to protect, then we also no longer have the need to protect us from success, which is one of our biggest fears. It's actually way bigger than the fear of failure. Although it's misunderstood and misdiagnosed and completely mistreated because we don't even see it, we don't understand it. But when we remove the need to protect, then we remove the need to hurt and we remove the need to sabotage. So that's ultimately where we have to focus. And as I said at the beginning, this is a roots conversation. Deep down, the very bottom of the root, that's where all of this was put into motion. That's where we've got to go. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be painful. It doesn't mean it has to take a whole lot of time. We've seen transformations. I've experienced personal transformations like that. It's crazy. I've watched people experience transformations like that. It's amazing. And as I said earlier in the call, if any of you are feeling some of these wounds, if you're resonating with a lot of these things, whether it's sabotage or trauma or whatever it is, reach out to us. This is what we do. This is what we as a company do, is we help people heal their wounds so that their circumstances in their lives can change. What most people are trying to do is just change the circumstances in their lives without acknowledging that there are any wounds. It will never happen that way. And the last thing I want to say to women, just to highlight what I said earlier, stop punishing yourself. Stop the self-abuse. You'll get nowhere with a whip. And it's interesting that even though you don't have that punishment in your feminine energy, when you become that masculine source of judgment and then punishment, you're way more vicious than we as men are. And we are the punishers. We are the violent energy. And yet when your violence comes out on yourself, it registers at a different level than masculine self-abuse does. It's like when power comes from a feminine source that's rooted in creation, like the woman who comes out and sees a car on top of her little baby. What's going to come out of that physical body is not even rationally understandable. And I think that's what's happening also when you become the judger and you become the punisher of yourself. The depth that you source your power from, you go that deep with yourself as well. Whereas masculine energy is not rooted in creation. Our power is more surface level. So when we go in on ourselves, it's not coming from that deep. It's not coming from the core of the earth. Yours is coming from the core of the earth. That's where your healthy power comes from. That's also where your unhealthy punishment comes from. You got to stop that. I called men forward earlier and said, we have to show up with this vulnerable masculinity, because I think the vulnerable man is the channel to heal the planet. The Dalai Lama said at one point that the world will be saved by the Western woman. And I don't remember the context. I don't know why he said that. But I think the world will be healed by the vulnerable man. So just like I'm calling men forward to live in our vulnerability, because that's what our women need. That's what the feminine energy on this planet, not just inside of our beings as people, individual containers in the human body, not just what those bodies need, but that's what our planet needs. And we're holding on to it because we are perceiving that it needs to be protected and that it's scary. But just like I'm calling men forward to be more vulnerable, I'm also calling women forward to stop punishing yourself with the same energy that is the problem. I felt this, what's about to come out of my mouth. Those of you that are on video, you see these tears. Because that's what I, as a little boy, need from you, mom. Not just my physical, biological mom, but my motherly energy. That's what I need. I need to know that it's okay for me to be vulnerable. I need to know that I won't be beaten up if I show my vulnerability. And I see that through you. If you beat yourself up for being vulnerable, and I see that and I sense that I'm afraid of my own vulnerability too. So that's part of the problem. So I'm asking you from my woundedness, I'm asking you from the little boy inside of me to show me what that's like, to be the essence of the nurturing, loving energy that you are. And you are the only one that can show me that through your container. So that's what I'm calling you forward for. As the divine motherly energy on this planet, that's what I need from you too. We both need each other. None of us are wrong. We're both hurting. But we need to come together. And I need something from you, and you need something from me. And when we can see that, recognize what's missing, not because we are lacking, but you have something that I don't have, and I have something that you don't have. And together we can provide an energy that will heal the whole fucking planet. But we have to come together as one, not continue to oppose each other in any way. So I appreciate your energy. I appreciate those of you that are on the line, on the phone, those of you that are on Zoom. I want to hear what you have to say. I don't want to do it now. I want to do it now, but I'm not going to do it now. But I want you to respond, because this is a conversation that needs to be opened. This isn't me. Again, this isn't my message. I said that at the beginning of the call. It's not my message. It's what I've learned and I'm reporting. And this is a conversation that we all need to contribute to in a powerful, healthy way. So please respond on social media, respond on email, respond on text, however, but let's co-create a solution in the form of compassion and contribution and conversation, rather than divisiveness of any form. When we can see ourselves in the core of each other, then we can source our solution from a connectedness rather than a divisiveness. Because if we are divided, now we're just playing tug of war. Either I'm going to pull you to my side or you're going to pull me to your side. But when we are connected, then we can look outward and say, this is what you bring to the conversation. This is what I bring to the conversation. This is what they bring to the conversation. Let's all come from this place of connection and love and co-creation, understand as best we can and acknowledge and accept the variation on the surface. And let's coexist and co-create from love, so that we can heal this masculine wound that I feel so connected to in this moment. Of course, I've been talking about it for 90 minutes. I love you. I'm going to end. I'm going to end by highlighting what I said earlier. In every single moment, we're either giving or seeking love. And that's because in every single moment, we're either perceiving that we are loved or we are not loved. And every time you are perceiving that you are not loved, you are wrong. Every time you are seeking love, it's based on the perception that you are not loved. And that's not true. You are seeing something that doesn't truly exist. It's more about receiving what is and not creating this story of lack and this story of deficit. There is no love deficit on this planet. There's just wrong perception.